Let me ask you this. Since you've been in the Brazilian Zouk community for such a long time now, I would be very curious to hear from you. What are some common issues that you've seen amongst your students that you wish you could rectify for everyone?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. I really wish I could wave a magic wand and make everyone okay with making mistakes. I know that sounds so weird, probably, but I have taught hundreds of students at this point, right? And without fail, one of the things that, and I again, I experienced this on my own journey too. One of the things that holds people back the absolute most is that they don't want to try something because they don't want to make a mistake. They don't want to, like, whether it's a student who walks in and has taken like 2 or 3 classes and they're like, oh, I'm not ready for social dancing yet because I don't know enough yet. And it's like, you could literally stand there and do the basic. And especially if you're like, hey, I just know the basic. Do you mind just like doing the basic with me? People would be like, sure, why not? And like, no one would care. But because they're worried about making mistakes, they won't just do it. And on lessons, I'll have even my more experienced students, being like trying something and they'll just stop halfway through. And I'm like, no, just keep going. And they're like, well, but I messed this part up. And I'm like, that's fine. It's more important that you like do it over and over and over again, even if you make a mistake. And it really holds you back from progressing, because if we are so worried about making mistakes, then we won't put in the necessary time and repetition to get better. So it makes the process so much longer. But I totally get it. Like, as a dancer, I get that anxiety of being like, oh, I don't want to make a mistake, or I don't want to look dumb, or, I don't want to hurt my follow, or I don't, all these things, like worries and anxieties. I wish I could just take those away. Not the worrying about hurting your follow part, but like the whatever that is that stops us from just doing it and making the mistake and learning from the mistake, because you have to make mistakes to get better. Like, that's just how it works, unfortunately, right? Wouldn't it be great if that wasn't how that worked?
What are some lessons that you learned from dancing that you're able to translate to your everyday life?
Ooh, that's a good one. How to deal with people. Like, I mean, maybe that's more my teacher training, but just really learning how to listen and empathy, like having empathy for another person and being able to, even without words, just hold space for somebody and just be like, you're having, an emotional moment, and I'm just going to be here with you, and being comfortable to do that. Because in dance, so often we aren't talking, or if we're talking, some people like really hate that, right? On the dance floor, it's like a huge pet peeve for some people. But you have to be able to be reading that other person, right? And like, maybe they're really into the song and you aren't. And you just have to be there for them and be like, well, I'm here for you because I'm not feeling it, or vice versa. Even just being comfortable with being like where you're at, right? If like I'm super feeling the music and my lead or my follow just isn't, being okay with that. So like those, I guess, unspoken human interactions, dance has really helped with that. Especially as like a very shy, awkward person coming into dance, I feel like my social skills have really improved because of dance, because it is such a, like, going back to that community aspect, like having to ask people for help, having to rely on other people and being like, I need to try this, and I've practiced it and I've seen it and I've taken the class, but I just need to like run through it 3 times. And even if it's horrible, like I just needed to do it 3 times to like get it in my body. So yeah, I don't know if that's a weird answer, but yeah, social skills, honestly.
I definitely understand that. especially like if you're not used to maybe spending a certain duration with someone.
Yeah.
It's going to help you. Yeah, I definitely understand social skills. I definitely understand, 100% understand that. I'm curious. Let me ask you this. Just these random questions popping in my head.
Yeah, no worries.
With Latin dances, salsa and bachata, there's like this little crossover.
Mm-hmm.
Where if you practice one, you can somewhat draw inspiration, also improve your skills with it. I'm curious, do you think there's any crossover between Brazilian Zouk and maybe salsa bachata, or maybe even kizomba? Is there any crossover that maybe one thing can help you in this, or vice versa?
Yeah. So I'll give you my honest opinion, and it may be unpopular. So warning, but it's just my opinion. I can't speak for the whole Brazilian Zouk world, of course, or anything like that. But personally, I feel like on the social dance floor, within reason, anything goes. If you and your partner, whether you're a lead or follow, so, whoever your partner is, can lead and follow it, it fits the music, and you both are having fun, that's the goal. So I know earlier in my dance career, I used to be more of a purist and was like, no, it has to be like Zouk, and you can't be doing like those other things that like draw from other dances. Like I was very anti-fusion. So I'm sorry to all my fusion friends. I have changed my ways, but outside of because there are fusion communities where they legitimately, you go in and like, you don't know what is going to be thrown at you, because that's the whole point, is to like do fusion. So a song comes on that you've probably never heard, and your partner might say, oh, I know tango, salsa, and Zouk. And I'll be like, I know waltz, West Coast, and I don't know, jive. And they're going to be like, okay. And you just create a dance together. Now that's its own, like that's a community in of itself. But I think even on the social dance floor at like a bachata social, like I have people lead me in Zouk head motion, and I'm like, ooh, and they'll be like, ooh, you're a Zouk follow. Okay. And then they start like throwing stuff in there, or like, in the Zouk world, I've definitely seen more bachata-y moves thrown in now. Like there's like a slide that I first saw in bachata that now I'm seeing people do in Zouk, which I think is super cool, right? Like I think there's only so many ways we can move our bodies, right? And I think as long as we're interpreting the music and like having fun, that's kind of the point. And so I do think they absolutely draw inspiration from each other, and especially as more dancers cross over and like do both, and do all of them, right? Because there's more than just salsa, bachata, and Zouk. Like I have a bunch of Westie Zouk friends, and I have bachata Zouk friends and salsa Zouk friends, and ballroom Zouk friends. There's less of those, but they do exist. But yeah, so they all draw from each other. Like I found a song that had like a waltz timing in it, and I have a friend who does Zouk but also does ballroom, and I was like, look, this song has a Zoukable beat, and then in these like particular moments in the song, they like do a timing change, which is super rare. Like not many songs do that. And it goes from 4/4 to 3/4. And I was like, you are the only person I know that knows both of these dances. Would you please do this with me? And we didn't film it or anything. We were just goofing around with it and like playing with it. But we were able to mix Zouk and waltz. Like you can just, as long as you're willing to explore it, you can do anything you want,
I'm curious, what are your thoughts on sensual bachata?
Ooh, I like sensual bachata, the dance.
Okay.
I have had I'm going to be very careful how I say this, I guess. I have had very negative experiences in the actual dancing of sensual bachata. And I think, I think the sensual bachata community is aware of these things, and I don't consider myself part of the sensual Zouk or the sensual bachata community. So I'm sure that they're addressing it in their own way. I have friends who are part of that and like teach sensual bachata and things like that. But I know that for me personally, and like a bunch of other people, it's like we like the dance and we'll dance it with people we trust, but it's hard to go social dancing sensual bachata because just crazy crap happens. That's like too often for me personally. So it's unfortunate.
Okay, I understand. Well, I mean, as for bringing it up, I have to ask. Yeah. I'm still like a beginner in Brazilian Zouk, definitely. Sure. I'm more experienced in salsa, bachata, kizomba. Mm-hmm. So the fact that you bring up, crazy stuff happening in sensual bachata, are you saying that it's not as bad as in Brazilian Zouk? And in my
experience, yeah.
Okay, and real quick, this is kind of came in my head as well. Would you say that Brazilian Zouk is not a sensual dance?
Oh, I think it is. I don't think it has to be though. Right, like in sensual bachata, in my experience, I'm just going to keep saying in my experience. I'm just going to keep throwing it in there. Even when I've taken classes, even when I've social danced it, there is a emphasis on being sexy and body waves and big dips and things, just things that make it more like, which I do enjoy that energy, to be completely honest. But in Zouk, there's absolutely a sensual aspect to Zouk, especially if you dance with like Brazilian dancers. They are so much more open with touching and just being like, just a little bit more open with their sensualness, excuse me, than we maybe are in America. And so it's super fun, but it never feels, I guess it can, right? Depending on who the person is, but in general, it hasn't felt predatory. Let me put it that way. And I don't, when I go and experience like a Brazilian Zouk social and they play maybe a more sensual set, or it's a DJ who's known for more sensual, gooey stuff, I don't get inappropriately touched. I don't have men particularly, asking to sleep with me or, things like that, or saying inappropriate things to me. Also, I don't get injured at Zouk socials as much. And unfortunately, and again, I don't know how universal of an experience this is, but the last several times I've gone sensual bachata dancing, and usually it's mixed with salsa, to be fair. It's usually not just like only sensual bachata. I've gotten like legitimately injured, like bleeding. One of the last times I went bachata dancing, a guy just like smashed my foot with his foot. And then he just kept going because he was in the middle of dancing. And so he just didn't care. And I literally had to go sit down. I was in so much pain. Now my feet were fine. But it definitely I left after that because I was like, I am in pain. The dude is still dancing, does not care, probably drunk. Let's be honest. His movements made me believe that maybe he was a little bit drunk. Which would also make sense why he didn't have good spatial awareness. But that kind of stuff happens to me at bachata, like sensual bachata stuff. And I can't even remember the last time I was injured at a Zouk social. Now, I've definitely been hit at Zouk socials or things like that. And I've seen injuries at Zouk socials. So they're not like, I don't know, like magical places where you don't ever get hurt. But it's just a lot less. And I'm not really sure what that is or why that is, but unfortunately that's my experience. So it is just it's sad, really.
I'm curious, this is me just talking aloud.
Yeah.
I'm curious if maybe, I don't know if it's the barrier to entry or maybe the intimidation factor is less bachata. And so maybe you get more range of people or more people in general. When I look at Brazilian Zouk, I would think to myself, I don't know if I could lead that. But if I look at some bachata, I'd be like, I might could do that. And so
I could probably do it.
and maybe, I don't know, maybe I believe it's safe to say that bachata is more popular currently than Brazilian Zouk. Would you argue with that?
Yeah. Well, so this is my theory. And again, I'm just spitballing my own thoughts here. This is not backed up with research. I have a theory that because bachata is more connected to culture, right? Like the Dominican Republic, it comes from like from a culture who is like, this is our dance, right? Like people dance this at parties and like at home in certain parts of the world. It's much more a cultural identity or part of a cultural identity. Whereas Zouk, Brazilian Zouk specifically, was like a music from a different country that came to Brazil, and Brazilians were like, or lambada dancers in Brazil were like, hey, we could dance our dance to this. And they kind of adopted it. It was never a Brazilian identity, right? It's not like samba where, you know, you're not going to walk up to a random Brazilian on the street and be like, do you know Zouk? They might. It's happened before, but I've met a lot of Brazilians like in the wild, so to speak, outside of dance, where they had no idea what Zouk was or never heard of it, because it's not a cultural identity for them. It's not something that's like rooted in their traditions necessarily. Now, that's not to say it's separate from Brazil. Like it is still from Brazil and, you know, has its own culture or like own history there. But it's a pretty new dance, let's be honest. It's like 60 something years old. So it doesn't have that same cultural ties, I think, that bachata does. And so I think there's also like a lot more like Zouk comes from a bunch of different techniques and was made in like dance studios versus bachata that was like a family dance to do at parties, or not a family dance, but like a dance that you might dance bachata with your like grandma, you know, at a party, from what I understand. And that grew into more from there and has branched and things like that. So I think in some ways that makes it, well, it's also older, but it makes it more accessible in some ways, because 3 steps and a tap and you're dancing bachata, you know what I mean? And you can kind of throw anything in you want, especially early on, and it's fine. Whereas Zouk has even the basic step, even if you do it in place, there's like stuff to do. It's easy to learn it, but you need to learn it to do it. And of course, there's lots of technique in bachata. So this is not me being like, oh, bachata is easy. I mean, it can be, but like there is technique to bachata and there is like so much to explore there. But that's my theory. I think that I've been thinking about this more recently, and I was talking to one of my friends and I was like, I think this is a thing. And they agreed with me, but I guess it'll be up to the internet to decide what they think.
No, I agree with you. I'll speak on it. People get upset, but I mean, bachata is a very simple dance. And of course, you can make it more complicated the more you progress in that dance. But if you compare the beginner stage in bachata to the beginner stage in Brazilian Zouk, I don't think there's any question of which was more difficult, especially for the leader, in my opinion. Leading in Brazilian Zouk, you have to have the utmost care for your partner. There's so much that can go wrong. And so I definitely, I won't argue with you at that one bit. Real quick, you spoke on it real quick. How much you know about the history of Brazilian Zouk?
I like to think I know quite a bit.
Okay.
I've talked to several Brazilian people about it. And also I took the MAC program, which is the Methodology de Alex de Cavallo. And he has a whole like 2-hour thing about, and like from researchers from Brazil who have talked about the history of Zouk. So I feel like I know a fair bit.
Could you speak on it?
But I'm definitely not the expert.
Okay. Could you? Yeah. I think I know a little bit about it, but I would love to hear what you have learned.
So from my understanding, it has roots in so many different dances, like African dances, specifically like machixe, but also like polka and like ballroom dances and things like that. So it really, the music itself comes from oh my gosh, the Caribbean islands, like
Caribbean
Guadalupe.
The original Caribbean.
The original, the like origin of the music itself is like a very Caribbean. It was Guadalupe, and there's another one, but I cannot remember the name of the island. Oh my gosh. Anyway, doesn't matter. So, or it matters, but like my sake of time. But yeah, so that music was like party music. It's like islandy. It's very traditional. Zouk is very fun. It's very like upbeat. You could definitely feel like you're on a beach at a party. And so that's where it got its name, Zouk. And there's some debate on what Zouk means, but roughly party, I assume, or like that's what I've heard. And that's what kind of everyone agrees on, but TBD. That music hit Brazil around the time that the music for lambada was dying. There's like a whole history to that. And the lambadeiros were like, well, shoot, what do we do? And they actually, fun fact, and I've actually heard people who like were there, they held a funeral for lambada. Like they actually did like a whole procession and everything in like, was it in Rio or Sao Paulo? One of the two. And it was a thing. So when they heard the Zouk music, they were like, oh, we can take our lambada, slow it down a little bit, change it a bit, and dance it to Zouk music. And you can still find something pretty similar to that called Zouk lambada or lamba Zouk. The timing is different now from like traditional Rio style Zouk, Brazilian Zouk. But there is a dance that is also called Zouk that's like Caribbean Zouk. And so it's very important to say Brazilian Zouk because they are different dances. They have different histories. Like they are separate.
And some people will get upset if you don't make that distinction.
Yes. Which I mean, I get that. Like if I had a thing that was mine and some person over there was like, I'm going to start using that same name and not tell anyone that you had it first or that and it's a completely different thing. Like I'd be like, what? Wait, what? So I do get it. But also it does come from Zouk music. So I don't think personally, I think it's okay that we say the Zouk because it did come from the history is tied. But yeah, it is Brazilian Zouk. And yeah, so basically it was like lambada dancers, which was a pretty hard dance. One of the problems with lambada, not problems, but one of the sticking points with lambada was that it was very difficult. It was very fast paced. It was very hard on the body. So it wasn't as accessible to people. And so when they slowed it down, they started doing it to Zouk music and became more accessible. And it was actually, believe it or not, easier. And so they also mixed it with a lot of things. So like Zouk, for instance, I saw you have some videos on Zouk. I actually trained with Ian earlier on in my dance career. And he taught me some Zouk for like over a year. And like they do a lot of ballet. So there's a ton of ballet terms in Zouk because that's what they had. It also comes from like a master of capoeira, right, which is another Brazilian dance / fighting form. So, you know, it's kind of like the people took it and they kind of like added stuff. And it just kind of depends on which lineage and who it comes from on what got added and the kind of styles. So of course, there's like a bunch of styles of Zouk now. So it's a very like fairly young dance, like fairly young. And it's also quite a melting pot of techniques and all sorts of stuff. Like there's a move called soltinho, but there's actually a whole dance called soltinho. So like even just that kind of thing, like it borrowed one move and called it soltinho, but like that's actually a whole dance. It's like a Brazilian swing dance. So it's very fascinating and it's cool, but it is like, it's not straightforward, you know? It wasn't like, you know, I think of like Argentine tango where it was like, you know, done in the streets is like, you know, subverting, you know, power, which is super cool. But that is not really, it's not really that kind of clear cut where it comes from, honestly.
I don't know much about Argentine tango. I have to look that up.
It's super cool. You should totally look up the history of Argentine tango. Okay. And if I got that wrong, I apologize to Argentine tango.
For someone who feels like they're stuck in a rut, like they're not getting better, and this probably applies to both lead and follows, but they feel like they're not getting better. What advice can you give that person who feels like they're stuck in a rut?
So I'll give them the same advice that I got in teacher training from that ballroom studio that I went like 2 hours every day. One of the master trainers sat us down one time and was like, okay, guys, I'm going to talk about something serious. And we were like, oh gosh, okay. He really wanted to get our attention. And he was like, I want you to know that you're going to hit walls in your dance journey, in your teaching and your dancing. And he was like, a lot of people will hit a wall or a plateau or feel stuck. And they'll give up and they'll be like, I'm not good at it. Or, you know, this isn't worth it. Or, you know, I'll never be good. Or, you know, all those things that we tell ourselves. Right. And he was like, but I just want you to know that everyone hits them. you're the most experienced teachers, the most experienced dancers, your favorite pro dancer, everyone experiences them. And the people who get really good are the ones that push through. And that was probably one of the most honest and true pieces of advice I have ever received in my entire dance training, because it's so true. Like, I've hit ruts over and over and over. I think it's just part of the natural process of learning, right? Like, you work really, really hard and then you're getting better. And then you're like, yeah. And then you're like, oh, shoot, I've been here a minute. And then you work really hard. And sometimes, maybe you take a break and you go down a little bit. Like, it's like change and learning isn't linear, even like we like to think of it that way. Like, I would love if I just continued to get better all the time. But, life happens. And so I would say, to anyone who's experiencing a rut, one, it's okay. It's normal, which I think sometimes is nice to know when you're in that moment, because it doesn't feel like anyone else is in a rut. Like, it doesn't feel like anyone else is experiencing that, but it's totally normal, totally fine. It's also okay to take a break for a few weeks to a month. Like, I think sometimes people are scared to take a break, or, they get burnt out, or maybe they need to like let their bank account replenish, and it's okay to take a break. Your dancing skill will still be there and you'll be better for the break. And that's for teachers and dancers, honestly. Also, something that helps me when I'm feeling in a rut, if it's not just I need to take a break for a little bit, is also getting inspired is really, really helpful. Sometimes it can be easy to like, get into a pattern, and whatever that pattern is for you, maybe that's why you're feeling in a rut. So maybe going to a dance congress, maybe going to a different city, going to a weekender, trying a different teacher, grabbing a dance partner, or grabbing a friend and being like, let's try some experimental stuff, watching dance videos. So whatever is out of the norm for you, just give it a try. You'll be surprised where inspiration hits. So sometimes for me, if I'm feeling in a super rut, taking a dance class or going to a social even in another city, if you have the time and energy and money to do that, is always super helpful for me. I was in like a super big rut and I was in New York for something else. But there was a dance social, a Zouk social, and I went just randomly and I had a blast. And I was like, wow, I really needed this. I just needed a different scene with some different people to get kind of the creative dancey juices flowing. And that's okay. So sometimes it's just getting out of the pattern that you've set for yourself. And that's okay to change it up.
I definitely understand that. I definitely agree with all of that. I definitely do. Let me ask you this. For someone who is an intermediate dancer and they want to get to that advanced level, in your opinion, what does it take?
Gosh, honestly, it's a lot about the details. I'm sure this has been said before. I forget where I heard it, but I forget who has said this before. But when you're learning a skill, but especially dance, there's like a huge chunk at the beginning that you can kind of like get on. The basic step, how to hold a frame, basically. Learning to step on rhythm. Like, those are like big milestones that like once you have them, great. Like, you've learned a chunk of the dance. Learning patterns, right? Those are kind of big things. But when you start talking about like feeling really comfortable, getting your own style, being intermediate advanced, it's the details. It is the little details that it's like how you articulate your foot. Like, that's going to take some zhuzhing to figure out how much tension to have in your frame. Like, all those kinds of things, how to feel the dance, But I also think something that's really important between intermediate and advanced is creativity. And you will see like the super advanced dancers, and this isn't any dance, they create in the moment. They play, they explore, they emote, right? Like, it's like you're watching art being made, right? And I think that as scary as that can sound, I I really think that that's a huge difference between like an intermediate advanced dancer. Because you have to be willing and comfortable enough to trust your technique, your body awareness, your sense of the room, your floor craft. You have to trust all of those techniques that you've built up, and then play with them, which is scary. But advanced dancers, I mean, they get really good at that, right? And so it's not, 9 times out of 10, it looks amazing, but they still make mistakes. But if you notice, like either one, people don't notice the mistakes because they don't react and they're just so used to it that they're like, whatever. Or they make it into something else and it's funny or cool in and of its own right. Or it's like, oh, that happened. And they just move on because they're used to it. And I think that that is a huge, huge aspect of becoming an advanced dancer.
Thank you guys so much for getting to this point in the interview. Again, we just had so much to talk about and things to just kind of gush about with Brazilian Zouk and teaching. So thank you guys for sticking in there with us. Do go check out part 3. And if you'd like to know what I'm up to currently, please do check out my website, mariposadancellc.com. And thank you again. Bye, guys.